You're listening to the Adopt Well podcast. We discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Amy Bagwell, here with my co-host and fellow adoptive mom, Macie Perreault.
Today, Amy and I will be talking about toddler adoption. But if you're a foster parent preparing for a toddler placement, or if you're open to adopting a child who's even beyond the toddler years, you'll still find value in this episode. We know that adopting a toddler comes with unique complexities and challenges, and today we really just hope to give you some tips that Amy has learned through her experience in bringing her daughter Lee home at 17 months old. I've been so inspired and so thankful to have a front row seat to watch Amy navigate all of this and just admire how she's taken on all of the unknowns with such confidence, and she's had such a teachable spirit through the whole process. This community is so blessed to be able to learn from her, and I'm so thankful for her. So, Amy, why don't you get started? You can just dive right into your story.
Okay, I'm really excited to share some more of our story with you guys. I know we talked about this a bit in the pilot episode, but we didn't get to really get into the nitty-gritty. So I feel excited to be able to tell a little more of the backstory and how we got to where we are. I get asked a lot if we plan to adopt a toddler, and the answer is kind of. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But starting at the beginning, my husband Charlie and I got married. We were 22, and after being married a couple of years, we knew that we were ready to start growing our family. But before we had really decided the best, next step for us, we had talked about adopting just because that's something that we were both interested in kind of from the get-go, but we weren't sure if that was our best next step, what we should do. And at the time, it felt a little more safe to just proceed with, let's just try to get pregnant. Let's see what happens, right?
Yeah.
So we stopped taking birth control, and honestly don't even remember the exact timeline. But after a year or so, we realized that obviously things weren't happening as easily naturally as it did for some others. But because we were still young, most of our friends didn't have kids, we really weren't in a hurry to have a baby, whether that be biologically through adoption or whatnot. So we just kind of kept doing our thing. And after a while, we pursued some fertility treatments just to figure out, okay, is something wrong? We went through the tests. We ended up also putting a profile book at our local crisis pregnancy center because we just thought, we know that we want to have a child. We don't know how that's going to come about, but we have open room and open heart and all of those things. So At the time that we were getting ready to do an IUI, we also were actually showing our profile book to someone considering adoption for her child. So it's cool looking back how it's like we were just kind of putting our feelers out there, but we hadn't really gone for it in any arena, so to speak. But I'll never forget, right after we found out that our IUI had failed, it was just as crystal clear as I've ever heard anything. I felt like God say, nothing is wrong with you. This is just not how it's going to happen.
Wow.
And so the more I talked with Charlie, we decided, we want to go full force into committing to adopt. And so shortly thereafter, we really looked into different agencies and whatnot and decided the best path for us. So when we had our home study done, I remember seeing the paper, I don't remember what the exact verbiage is, but essentially, what are the things that you're open to, right? And so we were like, we're open to age 3 and under, any race. We were just very, had an open mind and open heart about all the different types of children that we would be willing to adopt. But honestly, just assumed we would adopt an infant because that's kind of what's most typical, I guess, with private domestic adoption and specifically with our agency. So fast forward about 8 months, from the time we started till the time that our daughter Lee came home, we did talk to several expectant moms. We went through a few months with an adoption scam, which was really tough. And I will never forget when we got the call from Lee's first mom, where she essentially asked us if we would adopt Lee. I left a meeting, literally was in a meeting at work, got in the car, drove a couple of hours, and we came home with a toddler. She was 17 months old, and it was crazy.
Oh my gosh, seriously, what a whirlwind. I will just never get over how fast things can change. It feels like you're waiting forever, and especially after years of infertility, and then the fact that you can just go to sleep one night and it's a normal night, and then the next day you're bringing home a 17-month-old just like blows my mind. But I guess it's just proof that we can have our best laid plans, but things just don't always play out how we envision it's going to. So like you said, you guys had said you were open to adopting a toddler, but you sort of assumed that more likely than not, you would adopt an infant. So you were still kind of more mentally prepared for that. So I feel like this is a really good lesson for everyone, myself included, that if we say yes to something, we need to actually prepare for it. So can you give us some tips as far as what you wish you would have done that maybe would have helped you be more prepared for adopting a toddler?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely have a long list because, I mean, from the minute we got in the car to go pick her up, essentially, I started just Googling, like, what do 17-month-olds eat? How many words do they say? I mean, I just had no concept. So from the elementary things like that to all the way down to some more, emotional and traumatic, depending on their situation, their needs there. Yeah, I just started Googling. And so my number one piece of advice is to read the book, The Connected Child by Karen Purvis.
Yes.
And just on YouTube, she has lots of content on what's called TBRI, which stands for Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And it's so helpful, specifically for, having an older child join your home, because you don't know, a lot of times with adoption, you don't know what their background is. You don't know if they've faced any traumas previously in life, or just adoption alone obviously is a huge change in a child's life. But I felt like this is a good, she has lots of good content to help you prepare for an array of things that may come your way. But just being able to build trust with a child and to relate to them by them trusting you was hugely beneficial. And unfortunately, I didn't come across a lot of her stuff until after Lee had already been home for a couple of months. But once I did, it was like, man, it was so helpful. So I always tell everyone about the TBRI stuff. I got to a point where I realized that even though I don't know what, Lee has been through, or what the adoption itself has done to her mentally, like all these things that I was worried about, it's like, you know what? I would rather be over-prepared on the front end and look back years later and recognize there are some characteristics stemming from trauma that maybe I didn't realize at the time. So I just started trying to educate myself on all of that. Even though I had no idea whether or not she was really going through that at the time or not, I just wanted to be educated so I could spot it in case it started showing itself. For us, it happened to be toddler adoption that we needed to educate ourselves on. But also, we said yes to things like transracial adoption, special needs adoptions, all of these things and Lee is a transracial adoptee, but I did educate myself somewhat on that one, thankfully. But there are so many things that we said we would be open to, but that I really wasn't prepared for. I was prepared in my heart that I would accept and love this child, but really you need to also be prepared with logistics. So I'm not saying to totally dive deep into a full-fledged education on every possible scenario that's going to come your way, because that is maybe impossible. But as you're looking at the list and you say yes to these things, from transracial adoption to the age to the special needs that may come your way, I would just encourage you to make sure you at least know what you're saying yes to, because that's a bigger deal than maybe I realized in the moment.
Yeah, for sure. That's so wise to just be as prepared as you possibly can be. Because I guess ultimately, if you're adopting an older child, you just truly don't know them and you don't know what you're getting into. So I feel like that would be so helpful, not only for the adoptive or even foster parent to be prepared, but ultimately for the benefit of the child to be able to come into a place where their caretaker is going to be competent and how to just love them best and how to ease their transition as well as possible. And I could not agree with you more that sometimes we're just going to say yes in faith, because sometimes we have to make a split-second decision. And I know, like, for Greg and I, we would just have to pray about it sometimes and be like, oh my gosh, do we say yes? Can we do this? And we would just say yes in faith and figure out the rest on the back end. But a lot of times, like, if we know we're open to saying yes to special needs, or we're open to saying yes to a child that might have had some exposure to substances in utero, we should do our due diligence in figuring out what we're signing up for the sake of the child. So when you guys accepted Lee into your family, I know you had a little bit of access to be able to talk with her birth family. So obviously every situation is different. So some people will be able to ask the child's birth parent or previous caretaker some questions, but in other situations, there's literally not going to be any contact or information, which would be so hard. So if people do have the opportunity, what are some questions that you asked and that you think other people should ask about the child?
Yeah, so actually I will never forget on the ride, I was like jotting down in the notes app on my phone several questions that I had because, I'm thinking, this is a stranger. She was a stranger to us at the time. Now it's hard to even imagine that. But at the time, it was like a stranger entering your home and you want to be a good host, right? Well, imagine doing that as a parent to a child, right? So it's cool because I can look back at that note on my phone and see some of the questions I asked. But I've also, for the point of the podcast, added like 2 more that I wish I would have asked at the time. But here are some that I asked was essentially, what does she eat? Are there any foods that she loves or that she hates? Do you know of any food allergies? Does she have a favorite show, a movie, or a character of some sort? Things that I thought maybe it would help make her feel more comfortable. So, for example, if I knew that she loves Sesame Street, then I would be sure to play Sesame Street, What does a typical day look like for her? Is she on some sort of routine? Does she have a bedtime, a certain meal time? Is she expecting snacks at a certain time? How is she used to sleeping? That was a huge question for us. That was super helpful to have learned a bit about her history there. Is there any medical history that we should be aware of? Are there any words that she's saying specifically for her age? If you've ever been around a toddler who is just coming into their own language, you know that as a parent, you might understand their words, but other people might not, So knowing what she's saying when she thinks that she's telling me words would be super helpful. And then just a catch-all question, is there anything else I should know that would ease her transition? At the heart of it, that's really what I was trying to get at with everything I was asking.
Wow, yeah, for sure. That's such great advice. There's just so much to think about, but I love how you said you want to be a good host because this is such a hard transition for everyone, but especially for the child. So whatever we can do to help them just feel as comfortable as possible and known and seen and loved, I'm sure that helped ease the transition so much. So I know you briefly mentioned sleeping. What was the first night like, and what was your experience with sleeping over the first few months when Lee came home?
Okay, so this is one of those things where it was like, wow, we have no clue what we're doing. Thankfully, throughout our adoption process, I felt pretty strongly that I never really wanted to prepare physically in our home for a child until we knew that a child was, in fact, coming to our home. So our nursery, so to speak, was literally an empty room. We had no nursery furniture, nothing, never bought literally anything. So in some ways that worked out well for us because I didn't have all this infant stuff that I needed to return. But at the same time, we really had pretty much nothing. So we found out that she had not slept in a crib previously. So we knew that she wasn't used to sleeping in a crib, but she was used to sleeping in a bed, co-sleeping, whatnot. So we weren't exactly sure, like with our room set up, we're like, okay, we have 2 adults, a queen size bed. Do we put her in the middle? Like, what do we do? So we tried that for a bit, and then we had a pack and play. So we actually put her in a pack and play the first night right beside my bed, like right beside me. And she went to sleep relatively well. Knowing what I know now, she was literally exhausted. She just pretty much passed out. I think the emotions of the day and whatnot, she was exhausted. So the next next couple of nights didn't go quite as smoothly. So we started co-sleeping like night 2, thinking, okay, maybe this will kind of help her feel more comfortable. And so she joined our family on a Thursday. And so then on that Monday, first thing, we were at the pediatrician's office just to get like a general, we have a new child. Is there anything, just feels like you should go to the pediatrician, right?
Totally.
And that's something that our attorney also recommended that would just be helpful for her and for our pediatrician to kind of see her as soon as she joins our family, just so that he could make sure there was nothing that he saw that needed to be treated, even though she was healthy as a horse and still is. So praise God for that. But we talked to him about sleeping, and it was so helpful because he really recommended co-sleeping for a season just to help her feel more comfortable in our home. And it really made a lot of sense to me. But one thing I learned is that while, yes, every child is different, that for a lot of kids, stress really presents itself throughout the night. And in our case, that was true. It was when she would try to start falling asleep that you could see some symptoms that she was stressed, which, again, she went through a huge life change, so it's very understandable. So having her, if she were to wake up, not wake up in a room that she wasn't familiar with, that she hadn't seen before, but to wake up, okay, she's with people, she's not alone, it really helped ease the transition. So we did that for a few months, and then very slowly we transitioned her into sleeping in like a low twin-size bed in her room. And I remember even during some of that transition, I would peek in there and Charlie would be asleep on the floor right beside her twin bed. It was so precious. And I couldn't tell if he just was trying to help her ease the transition or if he just was so tired he fell asleep on the floor.
Oh my gosh, probably a little bit of both, do you think?
Exactly. It definitely started off with the intent to ease the transition, but I think it just ended up that he was passed out there for a while.
Well, if that's not the sweetest thing I've ever heard, bless his heart. He was really trying, He did a good job. So, when you were talking about that, you piqued my interest with the pediatrician. Can you tell us more about him?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know if everyone has this luxury, but we were recommended a pediatrician in our area who really understands adoption. He actually is a foster parent and a biological father and an adoptive father. So he really has been a huge resource, I guess, for us. And I feel like I could trust him, to say, here's how she needs to sleep. Here's some of the things that she's going to be experiencing, more than just like her physical development. He kind of had a little bit more insight. And even he understood, I guess, from a personal perspective, what she was going through. So if you are bringing an older child into your home, if you could ask around and just find out if there's any pediatricians who either specialize in that or just have personal experience, I cannot recommend it enough.
That's fantastic advice. One thing I was thinking was maybe people could even join a local adoptive mom or adoptive parent Facebook group and ask for a recommendation, because there could very well be an amazing pediatrician right in their backyard and they just don't know it. So maybe that would be helpful. So now let's switch gears a little bit. And I would love to talk about cocooning. Can you first off just tell us what it is, and then you can talk a little bit about your experience with it?
Yeah, this was huge for us. So cocooning essentially is an intensive time where just the mom and dad are caring for the child. So, for example, holding, changing, feeding, touching, kissing, comforting, hugging, all those things. It's just happening with the parents and the child. And oftentimes it can happen for a few weeks. It can even happen up to a few months. And many times people also recommend not leaving the house and just getting them comfortable in your home with you, understanding like this is their space. This is their place. These are their people, right? And so when I started all my frantic researching on toddler adoption, I realized, okay, cocooning is something we need to do. Everyone says do cocooning, whatever. So it also should be noted here that I actually had mono when we brought Lee home.
No.
I didn't know it until about a week later and thought, am I just a horrible mother? I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted.
No.
And this is a side note, but you guys, I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I can't do this. Like, what's wrong with me? And then one day I woke up and my fever was like 102.5. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm actually sick. So I called the doctor. I called her pediatrician and was like, do you see adult patients? Because I think I'm sick and I don't have a doctor.
Oh my gosh.
So he was like, yes, come in. And so anyway, he called me that night and he was like, you have mono. I was honestly so relieved because I thought, thank God I'm actually sick and not just like so tired, right? Anyways, that's a free story. So my point with that is with the cocooning, we started off for the first little bit, after the first day or two, trying to go strict on cocooning, where Charlie and I were doing everything. And like after a week, again, I'm just like, wow, like I do not feel good. So we call grandma in for backup, right? Which I felt initially like, oh my gosh, am I messing this up? What are we doing? And everything seemed to go fine. And so then after staying home for another week or so, and it was December, so it was cold, which was a little easier to stay home. But I just felt like Lee started getting a bit stir crazy. And honestly, so did I. But it seemed like she was starting to bounce off the walls a bit more than like she had early on. And so I will never forget, we took her to Target and she came alive. I mean, she was sitting in that buggy, waving at everyone we passed. I mean, she was like the star of the store. And it just kind of hit me that, like, this is probably what she's used to, right? Like, her life, because she does not come from an orphanage background, which is why I think that is more common with toddler adoption, is whether it's through foster care or international adoption from an orphanage background or something, cocooning, it totally makes a lot of sense. In Lee's situation, the more I got to know her, the more I realized like she really needed some of that, just getting out of the house, to put it plain and simply. So the best thing I would recommend is, yes, 100% would recommend the parents being the primary caregiver for a season of time. But also, depending on your child, don't be afraid to get out and about if you feel like it'd be healthy for them. Now, I am not a pediatrician by any means, but in our situation, I did see that worked. And again, we were always with her. So we took her to the mall to eat at the food court one day, and we were with her, obviously. And we were still feeding her, we were still caring for her. But she was just, I mean, the happiest when she could get out and see people and kind of explore and see new things. And so it was a good balance it took us a few weeks to learn the balance of that, but it really was a good balance for us. So the last thing I do want to say about the cocooning is, for sure, ask someone like a professional, ask other people in your community maybe who have adopted what their experience was, because this is just our experience. So I don't want you to just assume that's your experience as well. But one of the things that really helped me with that is we were seeing our pediatrician regularly, especially in those early days, and he was constantly asking us about our bonding process and how she was bonding. He was observing her in that. So we were paying a close attention to it. We weren't just super willy-nilly about the whole situation. We definitely wanted to make sure she was still bonding well. And I can report that she is very bonded, even according to our pediatrician, which was so encouraging to hear someone else say that than just the way that you feel. So definitely don't just take my word for it, but do go with the mom gut.
Yeah, for sure. That truly does make sense, what you were saying about Lee going stir crazy. I mean, I have seen Homegirl in action, and she is such a social butterfly. Seriously, she like thrives around people. She's so cute. And I think this is a great example of how sometimes we learn all of these things and we're educating ourselves and we feel like we have to sort of follow the rules, for lack of a better term, but it's not always so black and white. We really do have to consult our kids' doctors and take everything we've learned into consideration. And then on top of that, like you said, we do have to follow our mom gut. And then we have to be confident that regardless of what other people are doing or what people are posting on social media, we know our child and we know our situation better than anyone else. And we sometimes just have to be confident in that. So I love that. Is there anything else that you want to add about toddler adoption in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that applies to really any adoption, but specifically in our case, I would just say stay connected to your community. It is kind of weird when you're adopting an older child. You kind of have to feel like, okay, where's my place, right? Like, I went from all of a sudden having no kids, and our friends that either had babies or no kids, some friends had older kids, and a lot of times, you do things with people who have kids your age. And that in itself was like a shift for me mentally, like, oh man, now I'm like a parent who goes to the park. Who else goes to the park? So like stay connected to your community, find community that is in that same stage of life as you, and take advantage of it. If they ask you about bringing a free meal, let them bring a meal. An hour of alone time, like don't feel bad about taking an hour for yourself, or going on play dates. I would just say to let people love you, because that's one of those things that can be hard for some of us in any season of life. But it especially feels like when, I didn't just go through this labor, I didn't just bring home this infant, all of these things that maybe you don't need that, I guess you could say, like that care community as much as you would if you had just gone through a labor or something of the sort. But when you're bringing a child into your home, it is tough. And so there are people around you who are probably offering to do things, and I would say just take them up on it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I remember when we first brought our son Judah home, who we adopted, I was so exhausted because obviously I had a newborn, but I hadn't just given birth, so I didn't have like the physical recovery side of it, but I was still like figuring out how to be a mom of two and still be a wife and run a household, and I was exhausted, like I said. And I remember I was telling a friend, this is just so different than having a biological child, because you have a newborn and it is different, but a lot of things are still very similar. And I was like, I am so tired. And one of our friends was like, oh my gosh, we should make you a meal tray. We did that when you brought your biological son home. I'm so sorry that we didn't think to do that now. And so they ended up doing that, and it was such a blessing. And honestly, more than anything, it freed me up to just take some extra time bonding with Judah, because we were just getting to know each other. So I completely agree with you. There is so much value in just letting people love you. And even though that's not something that comes easily to me, I'm so thankful that I did allow that in that season, and that our friends were intuitive enough to see the need and fill it. But anyway, now let's switch gears for the last time, I think. So as we mentioned in our first episode, you run the Instagram account Toddler Adoption. And I know you and I have been chatting lately about how you've had a little bit of shift in focus that you feel coming. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously, Macie, like you and I have talked about this so much, and I feel like you've helped me even process through some of this. But for the sake of everyone else listening, this has been one of those things I've really tried to think through, where I need to spend the most of my energy, my time, to be able to really make the biggest impact and do the things that I love doing. And so as I've been just looking at my life as a whole, obviously keeping my priorities first, like being a wife and a mom, being a good employee, but then also I really have this passion to help educate the adoption community, because there's just a lot of things that I didn't have. And as I've learned them, I've thought, man, like other people just need to have this. And so when I started Toddler Adoption, it was because I was so hungry for some community of people who had adopted a toddler before, right? Like I just hardly knew anyone. So I thought, well, listen, we can just all learn together. So I've actually been able to meet so many people, and a lot of us have now also connected on personal Instagram pages as well, not just through Toddler Adoption. And it has been awesome to have someone to like ask questions to, that can kind of understand, that have been there before. But the more I'm thinking about putting out content on Toddler Adoption, I'm just realizing that so much of it is not just specific to toddler adoption. So much of it involves the adoption community as a whole. No matter the age that you adopted, whether it's at infancy or whether, it's an 18-year-old, right? A lot of these practices and core beliefs and foundations and language and all of these things, they really are important for any age or any stage of the adoption. So I was really like wanting to widen my net as far as how I can be a part of this like educational community. And so, at least for the time being, I've kind of made the decision that I think I'm going to step back from just focusing on toddler adoption, specifically with the Instagram page, and be able to spend more of my time and attention on things like this podcast, or sharing whether it's through blog posts or through Instagram captions or even just my personal page. I'm going to step back from primarily focusing on toddler adoption and just be able to hopefully add more value to the adoption community as a whole when it comes to education. So we'll see kind of where the future takes us, but for now, that feels like the best way that I can spend my time and energy. And yeah, it's kind of bittersweet, because I've met so many great people through there, and it served an incredible purpose from that. But we only have so much time in our days, and I feel like I have to make hard choices if I want to do things really well.
Yes, I'm sure that was not an easy decision for you to make. What is the best way for people to still be able to get in touch with you? Because I know that you still have a heart to help people who are considering adopting an older child or have adopted an older child.
Yeah, my personal Instagram is at Bagwell, and I feel like, one of the things that I will always be passionate about is adding a toddler into your home, just because we've been there, and I have learned so much, and while I still have so much more I can learn, I would hate to not have the opportunity to share some of the things that we've been through for someone else who's just stepping into them, because I know that's something that I definitely needed and even benefited from on the receiving end of things. So yeah, you can always reach out to me at Bagwell.
Perfect. And we can link that in the show notes for sure. We always do anyway. And actually, one last thought. Do you plan to still keep the Toddler Adoption Instagram page up? Because there's so much valuable content on there. People could literally go look on there for hours and find awesome input.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I do. I don't want it to just disappear. A lot of it is topical posts and whatnot. And so, yeah, I'm definitely going to leave them on there. I'm just planning to not add any more content. And again, we'll see where the future takes us. I don't know if this is a seasonal thing or this is a forever thing. But I don't want to officially just disappear anytime soon.
Well, friends, we're so glad you joined us today. We would be honored if you'd leave us an honest review before you go. You can find us on social media at AdoptWell and check out our website at www.adoptwell.com. As always, you can find more helpful resources right here in the show notes. We look forward to spending more time with you in the future as we all learn together how we can adopt well.